A curious thing happened to me recently. I was researching dinosaur gigantism for a video about scientific plausibility of kaiju, and in the process, I stumbled upon a website dinox.org. At the first glance, it looked like it was made in the late 90s, and after a quick overview of what was written there, I realized that I cannot go on any further without putting on my tinfoil hat. From this website, I learned that a man named Stephen W. Hurrell has a curious explanation for why the dinosaurs grew so big. If we compare them with mammalian terrestrial megafauna, even including the extinct giants, the difference seems kinda striking. What's going on here? The main force that prevents life forms from growing bigger is gravity, right? Well, then maybe in dinosaur times gravity was just lower? How is that possible, you might ask? Well, Mr. Hurrell suggests that it is because our planet itself was smaller and thus had smaller mass, which is known to be the main factor that determines gravity. In essence, Mr. Hurrell believes that the Earth is expanding, and he is not alone. It turned out there is a whole bunch of people who believe that. In the evening that day, I went to a local club where some guys used to jam music and where I used to have a beer and play some board games. So I told my friends that I have discovered the teachings of expanding earthers, and it was meant to be a fun story. I thought everyone will go ha 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 and be like, yeah, dang, and I thought flat earthers were crazy. But everyone was more like, huh. And it was eerily quiet, and then one girl was like, guys, I think I might be an expanding earther now. It makes sense. And I was like, oh, come on, where would it take extra mass from? And she was like, I bet there is some sort of space dust falling on a planet all the time. And then I was like, huh. After that, I spent quite some time researching, and I ended up making this video, so that you, my fellow science enthusiast, would have some reference point if you ever happen to encounter a person with unconventional opinion on the shape of our planet. So first of all, let's have a look at what modern science really thinks of the structure of the Earth. Earth is actually not exactly a sphere, but an oblate ellipsoid, which means it is an imperfect sphere that is slightly compressed at the poles. On average, any given point around equator is around 20 kilometers further from the center of the Earth than the polar regions. That happens because of centrifugal force. If you spin something, it tends to move away from the center, and the bigger the radius, the stronger the force. And equator is much further from the rotation axis than the poles, thus it makes a little belly. I guess, roughly speaking, we can still say that Earth is a sphere, and while it is not as precise definition as oblate ellipsoid, it is certainly way better than the disk. Yeah, I propose we have a look at the original wrong Earth model, the flat Earth. It is not very hard to see how our ancestors first came to that opinion. The thing is, our ancestors were not so much worried about the true shape of the Earth, rather their interests revolved mostly around food, shelter, and family. In early agrarian society, your world was limited by your village. Most people didn't travel more than a dozen kilometers away from home in their entire lives. It was easy to assume that it is generally all the world that matters, just a tiny disk of known territory behind which live predators or enemies, and it felt natural to think about this disk as such, the disk. I guess it would be interesting to study Earth concepts of nomads who were not tied to a single village but were on the constant move with their herds. They had the chances to come up with the right conclusion in their journeys, but nomads were also kinda not very good at keeping track records of stuff. They mostly relied on oral traditions, which tend to be not that effective. The earliest we humans officially came up with spherical Earth concept was in ancient Greece. Ancient Greeks were not nomads, but neither were they regular farmers. They happened to live on the rocky outcroppings of the Balkan Peninsula, which had no big fertile rivers, no endless green plains, just rocks, mountains, and occasional forest here and there. Ancient Greeks made the best of that. They cultivated olives and grapes, produced wine and olive oil from them, and crafted fancy pottery to store and transport these goods. They had great access to the sea, which allowed them to trade across all the Mediterranean, as well as sometimes they did conquest instead of trade. Greeks ended up forming a prosperous society with a solid middle class of merchants, warriors, and artisans, which made it possible for philosophers and scientists to appear. And when these guys started to make measurements, they very soon realized that the Earth was not flat. The idea first appeared in 6th to 5th century BC and became supported by solid evidence in 4th century BC by no other than the wise man Aristotle. It was pretty much a common knowledge in ancient Europe since then, and the concept slowly spread around the world from there on. Chinese were surprisingly insistent on flat Earth, up to the 17th century when European sailors showed them their maps. There's a widespread myth that Europeans themselves believed Earth was flat up until the Middle Ages, which is absolutely not true. Sure, there were some disagreements, like, for example, about how exactly antipodes, people on the other end of the globe, do not fall down, but in general, in medieval Europe, it was a common knowledge among anyone who cared to know that Earth is a sphere. Our modern trend of flat Earth believing actually begins less than 200 years ago, in Britain, with the man known as Samuel Rowbotham. Rowbotham performed an experiment aimed to determine the curvature of the Earth, and he used Old Bedford River for that. Old Bedford River is not a natural river, but a man-made irrigation channel that in some places goes straight for more than 10 kilometers. Rowbotham tried to check out how things look very far away on the surface of the water, using the extraordinary length and straightness of the Old Bedford River. He made some measurements and calculations, and he failed to find any curvature of Earth at all. Samuel Rowbotham fell victim to the phenomena known as atmospheric refraction. In the very same way as glasses change the direction of light to focus it, our atmosphere, thicker to the surface, bends light near the horizon, distorting the true location of stuff that is far away. Atmospheric refraction is a well-known issue for quite a long time in such disciplines as astronomy, leveling, and celestial navigation. Rowbotham, however, was either unaware of that phenomena or refused to involve it in his calculations. Either way, he didn't stop at just measuring the river. He wrote a pamphlet called Zetetic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe, under the pseudonym Parallax, and later expanded it into a book. Besides that, Samuel Rowbotham was also known to sell alchemical phosphorus-based panacea potions. He also married a teenage girl and had 15 kids, most of whom mysteriously died, possibly from phosphorus poisoning, and he did many other things. My girlfriend, who is a big fan of mystery, horror, and serial killer detective stories, said that she would totally wanna see a biopic movie about that guy. But what's more important for our study, Samuel Rowbotham was not alone in his beliefs. In the end of 19th century and throughout most of the 20th century, there were several British writers, inventors, pseudoscientists, and conspiracy theorists who developed and propagated the flat Earth concept. It managed to spread to America on several occasions, but generally stayed obscure and marginal, that is, up until the age of Internet. What happened to the flat Earth hypothesis in the age of Internet is probably best described by Mr. Richard Dawkins in his legendary Selfish Gene. The book has a whole section on memes, that is, particles of cultural information that behave as self-replicating units, like sort of viruses spreading through the population. And that is exactly what flat Earth hypothesis did, using internet as circulation system and afflicting its casual vulnerable users, so we ended up having flat earthers all around the globe. So what can be done to convert a flat earther into a spherist? Well, there are lots of things to try actually. You can propose flat earther to climb the highest mountain or building around and study the curvature of the horizon. Or maybe wait for the sun to set and then climb up that building or mountain to discover sun in the sky again. Or, if a sea is available, you can go to the sea and watch how ships disappear behind the horizon. If a convinced flat earther has some spare money at his or her disposal and is going to have a vacation sometime soon, you can advise to take a good look at the night sky, then travel to the opposite hemisphere and check out stars again there, and then try to explain how can they be different if the Earth is flat. If a flat earther is prepared to work hard to get the solid proof of his or her beliefs, he or she can enroll into the nearest pilot school, since the existence of flat Earth generally implies the existence of some sort of global pilot conspiracy, which you probably get initiated into sometime before getting pilot's license. Much quicker way to get the results would be to stop bickering that spherical Earth pictures from space are all fake and finally produce some real ones yourself. Modern flat earthers generally agree that the edge of the world is somewhere behind the wall of ice that encircles the disk in Antarctica. I do not see why is it not possible to crowdfund an expedition, climb the goddamn wall, make some photos from beyond the edge, and shove them in the face of the ignorant spherists. However, most flat earthers will do none of the mentioned stuff. It seems modern flat earthers hold very high standards for the evidence their opponents present, and at the same time very low standards for their own. Flat earthism also commonly coincides with other pseudoscience and conspiracy beliefs, ranging from homeopathy to reptilian world government. It even goes that far. A fraction of flat earthers believe that their main organization, Flat Earth Society, is actually secretly controlled by the government, who makes it ridicule itself so that flat earth belief doesn't get too many followers. What I mean to say by all this is that people who believe in flat earth might be just predisposed to conspiracies of all sorts, and it is all about what they choose to believe rather than about what can be proven and established. That means, in essence, that logical argumentation will probably help you very little, if at all, if you try to persuade a flat earther. So, what the hell? Let's move on. Remember that experiment Robotam did on the old Bedford River in Britain? Well, funny thing, at the very end of the 19th century, a man named Ulysses Grant Morrow made the same experiment in America, on the old Illinois Drainage Canal, and the results of his research were staggering. It turned out the Earth was not only not spherical, but neither was it flat. It was concave with sky and space in the middle. Ulysses Grant Morrow was known to be sponsored by the so-called Koreshan Unity, which claimed, by a pure coincidence, the very same thing, that the Earth was in fact concave. Koreshans were a small cult in Florida, active mostly in the end of 19th and the beginning of 20th centuries. Koreshan founder and messiah, Cyrus Stead, invented a device called rectilineator, with the help of which he and his followers have precisely determined the concavity of the Earth. Cyrus Stead was also known to dabble in alchemy, as well as he promised his followers to rise after death and take everyone with him to heaven, on which he failed. There are no more known surviving followers of the Koreshan teachings nowadays, but Koreshans were not the only and not even the first people to believe in Hollow Earth. It's just that in most cases, Hollow Earth was supposed to be the other way round, like a mysterious cave world somewhere deep beyond your feet. In fact, underworld of some kind has existed in the majority of cultures since the dawn of humanity, so the idea of Hollow Earth might be even older than Flat Earth, if we count myths and religion. If we speak serious science, one of the first notable people who messed with the Hollow Earth idea was Edmund Halley. Edmund Halley lived in 17th to 18th century England. He was the second official royal astronomer, he had a huge famous comet named after him, and he was generally successful, but he struggled to explain certain traits of the magnetic field of our planet. Trying to make sense of the data he had back then, Halley came up with the idea of 3 hollow Earths, one inside the other, like that Russian doll, and each with her own magnetic field, and they are all spinning under slightly different angles, and only then could Mr. Halley explain the anomalous fluctuations of the magnetism he detected. He also proposed that the spaces between these hollow Earths contain luminous atmosphere and might be habitable, and that leaks of that atmosphere produce what we see as aurora borealis. In defense of Mr. Halley, he lived just around the time when Isaac Newton described gravity, and the triple hollow Earth was kind of acceptable hypothesis for the time, but very soon it got disproved. Several experiments made in the next century managed to establish the approximate mass and density of the Earth, and it turned out the average density of our planet is twice bigger than the average density of the rocks that we find here on the surface. That means Earth is in fact not hollow, but filled with a material much denser and heavier than stones, which very much fits with the concept of iron and nickel core surrounded by mantle. Starting with the 19th century, hollow Earth appeared in fiction, but I would not call it serious science fiction. Even for its time, it was science fantasy at best. The most notable examples include works of Edgar Allan Poe, Jules Verne, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Vladimir Obruchev, and others, trending mostly around the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th. Hollow Earth as a concept still occasionally re-emerges in modern culture, mostly when fictional heroes need some new exotic location to go on adventures, as well as when some extra space is needed to accommodate a bunch of kaiju or dinosaurs. Given what is known to our modern science, it is safe to say that nowadays basically any version of the Hollow Earth counts as cake-tier fairy tale fiction. The principle that renders Hollow Earth impossible is called Hydrostatic Equilibrium. It generally applies to fluids, but also works well for solid substances with great masses, like planets. Two forces between which that equilibrium gets reached are the internal pressure force of the matter, which makes it expand outwards, and the gravity force, which forces chunks of matter to clutch together. The most stable shape for these two forces to be in a balance is a sphere, and if it rotates, it turns into oblate ellipsoid. The same principle can be observed in air balloons and soap bubbles. The pressure force is the same in both cases, it's just the opposite force that is different, but be it the surface tension of soapy water, elasticity of rubber, or gravity, the resultant equilibrium is always a sphere, or at least as close to the sphere as possible. It is interesting to follow how that equilibrium gets reached by comparing known bodies of solar system in their mass and shape. The biggest ones, the Sun, the planets and the large moons, are all spherical, but when the size decreases, something weird starts to happen. Smaller moons and large asteroids sometimes are spheres, but sometimes have kinda irregular shapes. One of the most notable among these is Hyperion, 8th largest moon of Saturn, which looks like a giant sponge. Hyperion has no less than 200 kilometers in any of its dimensions, and that is probably where the point of equilibrium lies. Diameters of 200 to 300 kilometers are that limit after which gravity takes the upper hand and squishes matter into a ball. Everything smaller than that has an opportunity to have any shape it wants. Actually, if flat earthers could agree that the Earth is no more than 300 kilometers in diameter, I would consider such a disk quite possible, except that it certainly wouldn't hold any atmosphere. As for the hollow Earth, well, hydrostatic equilibrium will inevitably collapse such a structure into a much smaller one. Nothing personal, just gravity. The one thing we do here on Hardcore Sci-Fi channel is, unsurprisingly, rating the science fiction hardness of all sorts of concepts. And while both Flat Earth and Hollow Earth easily land into the cake tier, it is not that simple with Expanding Earth. this one is quite new and a bit more challenging. At the age of 19th and 20th centuries, around the same time when flat Earth teachings slowly spread across Britain and when Cyrus Stead used his rectilineator to prove that Earth is concave in Florida, there was a general consensus in scientific circles that Earth is a sphere, packed with some very dense stuff from the inside. However, there was no unified idea about whether the size of that sphere is stable. The mainstream idea was one of contractionists. Those believed that Earth is slowly shrinking in size. There were also expansionists who thought Earth is expanding. There were also scientists who believed that Earth generally stays of the same size, but these were divided by the Civil War about whether continents move or not, into the camps of fixists and mobilists. To complicate it all even worse, there were fixist-mobilist hypothesis hybrids, as well as there were pulsationists who proposed that Earth was undulating between expansion and contraction cycles. In defense of the scientists of those times, only limited data was available back then, and they kinda had that room for speculations. At the very least, they were all a bit closer to the truth than Halley with his triple hollow Earth. Then, in the middle of 20th century, several significant discoveries were made, most important of which was detection of magnetic seafloor striping. The thing is, polarity of our planet shifts from time to time, and it gets recorded in the layers of the iron-rich minerals that get produced at the time around the mid-ocean ridges. To put it simply, it's kinda like the tree growth rings, just on a much bigger scale. The plate tectonics theory, as we know it nowadays, only appeared as late as in the 1960s, but it was almost instantly accepted worldwide, since it explained most known phenomena very well, and it didn't demand any additional contraction or expansion. Plate tectonics theory was generally a triumph for the mobilist fraction, and it spelled doom on the teachings of contractionists and fixists. Some of the expanding earthers, however, endured that paradigm earthquake. So what if we see how the ocean floor is growing, they said. That only proves that the planet is expanding after all. The thing is, most expanding earthers do not believe in phenomena known as crust subduction, which happens when one continental plate moves towards the other and starts to slide under it, slowly melting in mantle. While mid-ocean ridges expand the Earth, crust subduction under the mountains all around the world shrinks the planet back, and thus it generally keeps its size stable. World of the expanding earthers, however, works differently. One of their main arguments is that all the continents fit very well together, from which they conclude that apparently they once covered all the surface of the planet. It is, in fact, universally accepted that from 335 to 200 million years ago, all the modern continents were conjoined into a supercontinent Pangaea, and that is the exact reason why so many of them fit together so well. However, that is not true for the parts of the continents that made the outer rim of Pangaea, most of which nowadays face the Pacific and can only fit together if you very much wanna see them this way. One curious thing we can figure from the seafloor magnetic striping is the age of the ocean ridge expansion produced rock. Given that, and if we forget about the existence of crust subduction, like expanding earthers do, we can calculate how fast the Earth grew, and the results are stunning. If we use linear progression, it turns out that Earth has doubled in size since Jurassic, and if we extrapolate that speed further backwards, it will turn out that our planet did not exist before Devonian period. Most expanding earthers claim that the progression was actually exponential, and that Earth indeed did exist before Devonian, but they fail to explain why had it so suddenly started to gain mass with the appearance of life, which only takes a tiny fraction of the whole history of the planet. This is far from the only problem of expanding Earth. Radial expansion should have produced an entirely different fracture pattern along the mid-oceanic ridges. What's more, if our planet really grew in size, continental plates couldn't have just simply moved away from each other. They also had to change their curvature, which should have probably led to some spectacular, widespread, and as of yet undiscovered geological phenomena. Then, if we try to make a model of how exactly would gravity, atmosphere, and moon behave in case of prehistoric tiny Earth, we get a place that is not suitable for life at all. The exact physics of that, as well as most of the stuff that I have already covered, and many other things that I haven't even touched upon, are all very well described in a paper by Mr. Paolo Sudiro, published in 2014. It is called The Earth Expansion Theory and its Transition from Scientific Hypothesis to Pseudoscientific Belief, and I highly recommend this paper to anyone who is gonna stand his ground for or against the expanding Earth. Check out the link in the description if you are interested. One more issue I'd like to cover here is that thing that I asked to the girl in the club. If the Earth is expanding, where the hell does all the extra mass come from? Expanding Earthers have no conclusive hypothesis on that. Some scientists in the end of 19th century speculated that new matter can be produced at the center of the Earth from some as of yet undiscovered ether or something, but after general relativity and quantum physics, that kinda sounds ridiculous. While we haven't got there, and probably never will, we know for sure that the planetary core is part solid, part liquid iron, under immense pressure and rapidly spinning, but still just iron, which is good for making tools and weapons, but is not known to produce new matter. Some scientists claimed that the gravitational constant itself has changed since the ancient times, because of some mysterious complex physical process on the universal scale. And thus the force of gravity has changed, so the internal pressure of the planet gained more ground. However, a lot of studies failed to find any proof that gravitational constant had any significant changes for the entire duration of our planet's existence at the very least. And, well, then there is that thing that got me started on the whole topic in the first place – the space dust. The space dust does indeed exist, and the planet gains much more extra mass from it than from the occasional large-sized meteorites. You can find different numbers around the internet, with maximum estimates approaching 30 to 40,000 tons of space dust falling on us every year. These numbers, however, mostly come from the opinions of the experts, and we have much more precise data, assembled by the French scientists in Antarctica and published in 2021. Antarctica is actually a perfect location to study space dust, since there's not much life to mess up the samples and there are not many weather options, just wind and snow. Layer by layer, space dust settles in snow and can be thus studied in its pure form, which is exactly what the French scientists did, monitoring the same area during 3 expeditions in a time span of 15 years, and then they did the math. Their results were 5,200 tons of space dust per year, plus minus 1,500 tons. So, it is scientifically proven that we gain extra matter from space, and quite a lot, thousands of tons per year. That means Earth is expanding after all, right? Well, yes, but also no. First of all, besides gaining mass from meteors and space dust, our planet also slowly loses its atmosphere, mostly hydrogen and helium, at the rate of up to around 100,000 tons per year. So, if we measure by the pure mass, Earth is actually shrinking. However, if we roughly estimate just the accretion of rocks from the space dust, like take these 5,200 tons per year and extrapolate them up until the very beginning of our planet's existence 4.5 billion years ago, we get a whole 2.34 times 10 to the power of 13 tons. Sounds like a lot. But let's compare it to the mass of our planet, which is 5.972 times 10 to the power of 24 tons. Yeah, these are kind of numbers that are so big that they make little sense for mortal humans, so I propose we convert them, say, into exagrams. And we get that, 23.4 exagrams of space dust against 5,972,000,000 exagrams of Earth. That means modern-day Earth is made of space dust for the whole 0.0000392%. I mean, that number is of academic interest for sure, but in no way it can explain expanding Earth. Realistically speaking, if expanding Earth was gaining mass from space dust, dinosaurs would be buried beneath dozens or even hundreds of kilometers of rock, and we would probably never find their fossils. More than that, the only reasonable time to expect rapid planetary growth from space dust would be not in the recent times, but in the very beginning of the formation of stellar system, since that is exactly when space dust is abundant. At some point, a star accumulates enough mass to start nuclear synthesis, and then solar wind blows most of the dust away. Then planets act like giant vacuum cleaners, absorbing the remaining dust around their orbits with gravity. That means the older is the stellar system, the less there is free space dust in it. So, yeah, space dust is real, it falls on us, and the planet actually gains extra mass from it, but so little and so slowly that it's barely significant, and is certainly not enough to double the size of planet since Jurassic. Where does that all leave expanding Earth? Well, if we are being strict, it's around the same place where flat and hollow Earth ended, in the cake tier. However, despite all the evidence mounted against it, at the very least expanding Earth gets the general shape of the planet right, so I guess we can raise it to the science fantasy walks tier. That, however, is not where expanding Earth ends. The thing is, not only have expansionists survived the plate tectonics theory, but they have also diversified, branching into fast and slow expansion hypotheses. Everything I have discussed so far was about fast expansion. The slow expansionists are much more adequate. They do not deny crust subduction, and they claim that Earth expands for only like half a millimeter per year or less, without any significant mass gain. They even have some evidence to back their claims. Nowadays, with satellites and GPS stations around the globe, planetary size can be measured in real time, which was done in several studies, and some of those resulted in 0.2 to 0.5 millimeter increase. There were certain problems with these studies, however, as well as there were other studies, concluding that the planet is expanding with the speed of 0.1 plus minus 0.2 millimeters, which basically means it's probably not changing in size at all after all. Slow expansion hypothesis also attempts to explain why and how the planetary expansion is supposedly happening, like through matter redistribution in the core, mantle plumes, and earthquakes. Slow expansionists get published in real scientific journals to this day, and while they make up just a tiny minority and have a lot of contradicting evidence to overcome, I'd say their hypothesis has the most merit of what I've touched upon in this video, up to maybe aluminum or even iron and glass tier. As for the rest of the alternative Earths, there is one issue that their defenders seem to have in common, and I'm not speaking about tendencies towards religion, alchemy, and conspiracies. Rather, there is a same glitch in methodology that they keep repeating. I suspect they might not understand the difference between words theory and hypothesis. Some people say, it's just a theory, meaning it's not entirely proven and unclear yet. In reality, theory is in fact the most solid explanatory basis there can be. Theory is something that is supported by all the evidence that science has accumulated so far, and it should be capable to explain it all. What these people probably want to say is, it's just a hypothesis, which is an idea that explains a piece of evidence that seems to contradict the generally accepted theory. hypothesis is considered valid unless it gets disproved. It can also be proven, and then it will take the place of the existing theory. In that case, however, hypothesis will become a new theory and will bear the weight of explaining all the previously accumulated evidence. So, oblate ellipsoid Earth with iron core, mantle, plate tectonics, and generally constant size is our current theory, and all the other Earths are hypotheses. Bringing in one controversial observation does not disprove the current theory. Hypothesis also has to be able to explain all that the current theory stands on. Instead of doing that, alternative Earth defenders do claims like geography and physics are pseudosciences, or chemistry and astronomy are from Satan, or evolution theory is a reptilian world government conspiracy, which not only does not help to defend their hypothesis at all, but rather makes it even less viable, since it starts to contradict even larger body of our collectively accumulated data and research. One more thing that might seem logical to include in this video is young Earth, but the problem with that is that it does not even pretend to be science. Generally, all of the young Earth arguments boil down to because Bible says so. And I am not in the mood to fight God today. So that's probably all I have to say on the topic of the wrong Earths for now. If you liked the video, leave a like, and if you'd like to see more like it, subscribe. That is scientifically proven to work. Thanks for watching, stay hardcore, and see you in the next video.